Hey, it's me, Grzegorz from Artistry of Code podcast. In this episode, we had the honor to host our first guest, Nicolas De Boose, who is a two-time former CTO of startups and now a tech lead and architect at Urbantz. Nicolas is on one hand a wonderful person and on the other a real expert in applied clean architecture. Throughout the show, we are exploring his pragmatic approach to making clean architecture happen. Stay with us to the very end to learn more about Nicolas and his reasonable approach to work and software development. We found this interview very inspiring and refreshing, and I'm sure that you'll feel the same. We are also really looking forward to host Nicolas on the show once again in future. If you learned something or got inspired by this episode, feel free to share it with others, leave us a comment under the episode on Twitter, Facebook or LinkedIn. And if you're new to the show, consider subscribing to our channels over YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any podcasting app of your choice. This way we'll stay in touch and you won't miss any updates. Enjoy the show! Welcome to the Artistry of Code podcast, where we, together with our guests, are seeking ways of doing things right and having fun with it.
Software, architecture, soft skills, teamwork, and other crazy buzzwords.
Are you ready? Let's bring more value to the business.
Hello and welcome from Brussels. This episode is pretty exciting for all of us, as this is the first episode of the Artistry of Code podcast where we host our guest. And this guest is
Nicolas De Boose.
Hi, Nicolas, and welcome to the show.
Hey, Nicolas. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, we have a pleasure working with Nicolas for quite a while on Urbantz. We are here on the company on-site meeting for a few days, and we took the opportunity to talk about some interesting topics today. So, Nicolas, I have to introduce yourself to our guests. And you are at this moment, obviously you are the tech lead on Urbantz for about a half a year now, but you started your career quite a while ago. I don't want you to look old, so I won't mention how many years you are working as developers, but you are free to tell our listeners later on. You are mostly focused at this moment around the architecture and around JavaScript / TypeScript. And you are making like great move at Urbantz, and you are responsible for a lot of stuff here, which hopefully you will be able to tell us about. If you could tell our listeners about yourself a bit more.
Sure. So first, thank you very much. I'm super happy to be your first guest here. It's an honor. So yeah, I'm Nicolas. I'm one of the tech lead at Urbantz. I worked there for 6 months. I was happy to see you. Before that, my career is only freelancing. So I start as a freelancer very early. Because of my father that was freelancer, so that might help. In 2000 something, or maybe a bit before, I discovered internet and I discovered HTML and I discovered CSS and JavaScript. There was no Google, it was Alta Vista at this time. And I was amazed by the fact that you can push something somewhere and everybody in the world can see your thing, like an article. So I made I have a blog post where I just tested a review video games. So that was my patience at that time. I was super happy. I have only one visitor a day, but for me it was just amazing. So it started like that. Then it became my hobby, my passion, and I did like the classic IT school in Belgium. Then I start directly to work for a little company. Then I get a bit bigger and bigger. At first, I was not like I'm now. I mean by that I was more sure that I was the best developer in the world when I start. So I was like not hesitating. I was also maybe a bad coworker because I try to be better than the others. So apologize to everyone for all my old work coworkers. But then I figure out that it cannot work like that. You have to be more humble. You have to read books. You have to know what are the others are doing. You have to only to challenge yourself. Maybe I was a bit scared of reading books and see, oh, maybe they are smarter than me. So I think that's what happened. It's a bit sad, but my father died, and I was like, okay, maybe I should change something in my life. I just changed that. I started to read books. My very first book was Clean Code by Uncle Bob. I was like, oh shit, this guy is smarter than me. And then I read all his books. I read a lot of books, and I still read a lot. And then I try to improve myself, improve the architecture, improve the way I code, etc. And now my favorite things is really, it's not about code like JavaScript, C Sharp, Java. I did that, or PHP too. It's just about having a clean architecture, not the clean architecture from Uncle Bob, even if I try to sell it, but a clean one that can scale, that can be testable, etc., etc. And that's and if we have that, I'm happy.
Oh, that sounds incredible, like a Hollywood movie story.
Yeah, you really set, you really set the bar high, because the episode starts to be super interesting even at this point. So I'm really, really looking forward to the rest of it.
Yeah, Nicola, it's not top secret that prior joining Urbantz, you've been CTO of the company. When prior that you were tech lead, and then you moved back to the tech lead. I believe it was your decision, and it's pretty interesting story. So I would like to ask you to tell a bit more about your insights on this journey.
Yes, so indeed, I was a CTO of two startups. Two of them are still working, so I just left. I didn't left because we were at bankrupt or something. So they are still working. It's fine. I won't go too much into the details, but the last one, I became father, and being a CTO for this company and being a co-founder also, it takes time. It's not only technical things, technical problem, but it's also people problem, sales problem, product problem. It's a lot of problem, but also it's also a good thing. So you have to think about a lot of things. And at that time, I was struggling to have time with my new boy. It's my first one, so it's like a punch in the face. And then I have no time to do anything at night, or I have to sleep. The weekend it's harder to work on something. I also have a blog post, but it's not updated. So I was like, okay, I'm the CTO. I'm not sure about the product also, I must say. So I simply left because I didn't have the courage anymore to do everything. And I was like, okay, what make me happy? Dealing with people problems. It's maybe a bit rough like that, but dealing with people problem, it's not what make me happy. I think that there are people that doing that very well. My wife is a specialist in that, so I ask her a lot of tips and so on, but I'm not. What I like is technical, and I know that if I want to go to the office to work 8 hours a day or more, I want to enjoy it, and the way I enjoy it the most is by talking to developers, talking architecture, talking code, etc., etc., and not dealing with the product and so on. And so I found Urbantz, and I knew that they were looking for a CTO also. So I came my very first day also was the very first day of the CTO. First, I was like, I want to be the CTO. Like, it's the highest thing that you can be as a technical guy, and you want, I don't know, money or recognition or whatever, and you say, okay, that's, I cannot go higher. Maybe after CTO of Amazon, maybe, but that's another story. And so they gently told me that maybe you are too young because you did also only startup, not scale up. And I was like, okay, it makes sense. And also, when I see what the CTO is doing, I don't want to be a CTO in that company. Not because it's not a cool company, it really is, but because I wouldn't be happy.
I wanted to ask you if after this time that you spent with your family and in professional time, you went back to team leading and probably creating some code. Do you feel ready for another step up on the in your career, getting back to the CTO role, or it's not a way you would like to take?
Not today. Maybe later. Maybe when I will have the courage again, and when I will sleep well every night. Um, but for me, it's not now. Now that I did that, it's not a goal for me. For me now, it's be happy, do what I want, do what I love, and also, of course, have enough money. So that's three good aspects. Maybe being a CTO, I will have more money, but I don't think I will be more happy. So maybe if I'm the co-founder of another startup, I can do it. But right now, I think I learning a lot in a scale up also. So right now, I don't see why I would be a CTO of another company.
What you said very resonates with me personally. And I think will also resonate with a lot of our listeners, that being happy about the things we do and having fun from the things we do is crucial. If we don't, as developers, if we don't feel like comfortable with how the work looks like, we should have the courage to change that. And I also personally have a history of stepping down from a function. I never have been a CTO, but I was in some managerial functions in the past, and I also reconsidered everything. I've stumbled upon different difficulties and different problems, and I've chose to not have those problems. I simply chose to have different problems instead. So I'm really happy for you, Nico, that you also worked out this path, and you're happy with this.
I believe we could change the title of this episode to "Do What You Love and Be Happy." The interview with Nicolas.
Having fun with it is part of the intro, right? So
exactly, yeah. But yeah, we have to provide also some technical value to our listeners today. And you are the expert in a domain which is about domains also. And this is the clean architecture. And we would like to talk about it a bit today. Can you tell us a bit about the challenges which come with implementing the clean architecture within the project, which is already there for quite a few years? Because for sure it's a bit different from creating the project from the scratch.
Yeah. So adding a new concept in an existing project, it's always hard, especially if it's like a complete opposite of what previous developer were doing. Like if some developers already use like repository patterns or something like that, then it's easier to come with something to add on this existing concept. But when there is nothing, it's where it becomes more complicated because also what you have to do, one of the first thing you have to do is convince people. And it takes time, especially if they work like this for years and everything were fine. They don't understand why they have to change, why we shouldn't call the database directly in the code, for example, or things like that. And I had the experience twice with big legacy code, and I think that most of the developers also have this experience. Is what happened when you have a super um, a library to update. You are really far away from the last version. You have to upgrade. There are BC break on every version, or you have a big framework like I used to use Symfony in PHP, and in every version they are like, now we are moving folder. Now we are moving folder again. Now it's not Symfony, it's app. Now, so you're like, I'm not the master of my code anymore. You are choosing for me where I should put things, where or I should name them, and I'm never confident when I upgrade something because you may break something every time for me. So the thing is, every developer are like, okay, shit, I have to update something. It will take me time, but of course there is no added value for the business, so we won't do it right now. So at a certain point you have to you have to think, okay, maybe there is a problem, maybe there is a way to fix that, not fix everything, but at least when I am dating the fetch api and now there is a new required argument, I should not go in every direction and retest all my application to make sure that everything is working. So the that's how you can sell clean architecture. It's a part of the clean architecture. This is more hexagonal architecture, but it's part of clean architecture. And then of course you have to sell other things like DTO, value object entities, repositories, also things like a bit also related to DDD. It's kind of related, not really super related, but there are similar things. So what I usually do is check for the code and see what we can improve easily, and doing it bit by bit. Maybe the first thing to do is creating a repositories without interface. So we are breaking the rules, but that's fine, etc., etc. So it's really like, by seeing the code after some experience, you can say maybe it will be easier on that way or on that way. And I think that of course I may have wrong most of the time or sometimes, but but convincing people is the hardest thing for me. Sorry, and keep them updated, of course, because first you won't sell everything and say, by the way, now you have to implement everything on the clean architecture. Good luck. But you will start with, okay, let's maybe start with dependency injection instead of calling everything everywhere. Maybe we can start with services, so with a little repository there, and once they are comfortable with it, you go to the next stage.
Okay, you said that it's the most difficulty lies in convincing people to the new idea. So imagine if you had an idea to implement the new clean architecture in a legacy project, and you will hear no from very important developers, experienced, having a long experience in the company. They will say, no, we don't agree, we don't want to do it. Then what would you choose? Like, lose them or change your plans and go on with the architecture that you clearly see is wrong, is gonna make us the company problems in the future?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It happens already. You have to know why they say no. If they say no because they don't see the benefits of it, then maybe you are missing an important point. like maybe they never updated the library, or every time that they updated the library there was no problem. Or what I already heard is yeah, but we have find and replace in IDE, then it's easy to just use that functionality and we don't need what you ask. So first it's to understand, maybe stay a little bit more in the company and see, maybe you didn't see something important in day-to-day life, maybe it won't fit. Maybe also it depends on the project, of course. If it's a project of 3 months, then maybe it's not important to bring the clean architecture. um, but at one point, if I try to never use my, how can I say that, my leveling, like tech lead. Sorry, I'm the tech lead, you have to follow me.
The authority, right?
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to do that. As a CTO, I sometimes did it, but I just said, trust me on this. We will see in 2 or 3 months what's the benefit or not of it. But please trust me on it. And it's easier if you are the CTO, of course, and you ask trust, and they follow you. And after 6 months, they were super happy to use that. So that's fine. But coming in a new company, and if the guys at the same level are me of me, or even below, that's not a problem of level. It's a problem of people have to trust you, have to follow you. Otherwise, even if it's not the same level, it will not work. So if after some point they're just saying, sorry Nico, but it's really, you are saying shit and we will never follow you, then I will just leave. If I see that they don't agree, they don't want to evolve, they don't want to change, or maybe I'm not just the guy for this company, and that's fine. Maybe it's not because of them. Maybe it's because of me. And it's important that in a company you are following the same direction. Otherwise, it will be boring. It will not be fun if you have to fight every day.
It sounds like you're very attached to your beliefs about the clean code, and this is good from the one perspective. From the other perspective, Marek has said it clearly that in Urbantz you need to leave your ego at the door, and it kind of maybe not resonates, but I see like two sides of this, what you of what you said.
And if I can say, I totally agree with Mike. And for me, I'm fighting with myself. And every time that I try to say something, I'm like, is it because of my ego, or is it because of my experience? And it's always hard to do the difference, and it's always a bit experience, what you saw already, etc. But sometimes you have opinions. Sometimes you know that going in that direction it will fail. So it's not a matter of I'm right, you're wrong. It's also for me it's a debate. And in Urbantz, for example, we implement a kind of clean architecture, but I sometimes give them space and say, okay, you don't want to use DTO, let's not use DTO, and we will see in 6 months how it goes. So it's also choosing your fight, let's say. But it's hard if you have a tech lead or a CTO that say, oh, you not agree with me, okay, that's fine, let's follow the junior that speak louder than me. I don't know if it will help the company neither. And I don't know if it's ego, so hard to know.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I find myself in what you said also, and you said it very well, and I totally agree. You have to fight with yourself, yeah, when you want to introduce something that is not widely accepted with ease. I have been there. I have done the same one, and I am very glad that you said it. Thanks.
You're welcome.
So the question which I have in my head regarding, like the whole work which you've did so far with that clean architecture. Let's move in the history of the first question up to the point where you were able to convince people, you were able to introduce that concept. And let's say you've implemented this to a degree which is satisfying, right? So you don't necessarily have everything done perfectly by the book, but that's life. Now, I'm just curious, do you have any like tips or experiences which our listeners and we can use in order to, like ensure that this won't rot over time, that it's not going to get worse again, right? Because, you've convinced the people who are at the company at the moment, but new people will come in. Sometimes you're going to be off for a longer vacation and nobody is going to keep an eye on things, right? So did you find any ways of working which are, like persisting this over time and not allowing it to simply fade away back to the old ways of doing things?
So no, the answer, I have no magic for that. I tried different things like a list of checks of when you create a use case, it should be that way, that way, that way, that way. It doesn't work. I also first I was reviewing everything, but it doesn't scale. And really, sometimes it's only weeks of review, and really you don't want to do that. Even if you think that they will learn. Maybe one guy will learn something, one other guy will learn another thing in another review, and maybe they will, because it's not as important for them, they will just forget something like that. Not because they don't want to, but because, oh yeah, I forgot that. So after 5 times, sometimes it's working, but indeed, also you have to one time. I I trust people, and I know that I learned them. Now I know, for example, that in my previous company where I was the CTO, they are still continuing. I don't know if they are. It's perfect or not, but you know what I mean by perfect. It's never perfect, but if it's good or not. But I'm sure they are doing well, and they told me that they sold the idea of clean architecture to the next developers. Maybe it's not exactly my vision, but it's fine. And it's the same for the company where I am now, and where I will be. Um, I cannot keep an eye on everything, and I don't want to. Like I said, I trust people, and maybe sometimes reminder like, hey guys, I saw that in the code. It was pushed a month ago. Be careful when you do that. But if maybe yes, a linter or something might solve issues, but honestly, I tried to find these, and I couldn't. Maybe there is a business.
I have two things in my head here. Perhaps you can share your opinion on those ideas. I've heard about the practice which is done by some of the companies, which are like periodic reviews of the architecture, right? So let's say you have that sprint work, and then a quarter ends, and then you're having a team sit up and you're doing a collective review of how the code looks. When you just open the editor, you browse through it, and you see, whoa, how did we turn into that particular place? How we ended up this way, right? So that was like first of the ideas. And the second, which I recall, I didn't try it out myself, but I've when we were researching for different CI tools or approaches which we could use to ensure a couple of things, I've heard about the concept of architecture testing. And what this was doing was that people were writing tests which were checking if you have, for instance, a controller, then you have a DTO defined for it. So these tests were actually looking into catalogs, into files, and they were trying to enforce something this way. I'm just curious if you think that these could work out. Perhaps you tried something like that. What's your opinion?
I think that both my work, that the second solution was something I would like to have. Like I think it's it's something interesting, like every controller should have their own DTO, so you have to. So I think that's fine. I may maybe there will be an exception. I don't know, but I think that might work. But it's only a part of the job. What we and for the first one, I think also it's a good solution. So what we decided today on the on site of our company, it was to create a Slack channel which is called Clean Architecture. Ask question, and then you have one or multiple evangelists, let's say, that can answer your question, like how should I do that? How should I do that? And also page on Confluence where you have the most common questions, or some kind of FAQ, like I want to move this query to a repository. What do I do, etc., etc. So here it's more about how to refactor from legacy to something new. And I think that also what we will do is to see each other maybe twice a month, like the evangelist, and say, okay, I had this issue, this issue, this issue, to explain to my team. I'm not sure if it's the proper way, etc. So it's not. It's to have, the purpose is to have evangelists in the company, that in every team, and to say, okay, you will sell not maybe the clean architecture, but how we want it to be architectured. And if you have question, maybe we can regroup together. And so, like you said, once a month. Here it will be twice a month, I think. But I don't have better idea for now.
I really like the idea with the Slack channel. I mean, I feel like the Slack channels are able to solve a lot of things if used properly. And the cool thing which you're doing with this is that by having that, you're actually creating the alignment for the refactorings that everybody can do, and they will do in future. So we were talking about this on the third episode of the podcast, so the approaching refactoring, and then there we emphasized also that making sure that everybody is moving in the very same direction while introducing change is very important. And it's super cool that you guys figured this out with the Slack channels, really. And if you have motivated people who are posting that and this is working, well, then I wouldn't see the need to have those quarterly reviews of that architecture. If that's an ongoing process, that's even better, because that means everybody's thinking about this day to day, not once in 3 months, right? So I'm really looking forward to getting to know how that's going to work out.
Yeah, what I liked about the idea with Slack channel and asking the question is that you will naturally find those evangelists in your company. Yeah, they are not picked like by some authority, but you will find them by their activity, if they're engaged, if they're interested in those topics. And that's very cool. Yeah, and we also have this kind of way in Fronteg. We prepare the design documents that can be reviewed by anyone when we start a story, and it's also making quite a good job to keep consistent.
We've touched pretty interesting part of basically anything about the code in the company, which was alignment between the team members. Yeah? And I can recall some long discussions not that long ago, because the clean architecture is a set of concepts, then a set of rules, let's say, but it's not like everything is like 100% clear and set up, because everyone is doing it a bit differently. So how do you usually approach this kind of setting up the alignment in the team you are working with?
So the thing is that I never worked. I only worked in startups as a tech lead or CTO. Never in a scale up with multiple teams, with multiple vision, with different vision. So to be honest, I don't know what will be the future. I would say we would it would be great to have the same vision for almost everything. Otherwise, you will have differences. Maybe it's fine also to have differences, because if we go microservice, then why you should follow a rule that you don't want, that was made by another team. So it also makes sense. So for now, I must say that I really don't know where we will go. The rules will be done one by one. It's not rules. And it's rules, but it's not dogma. So it's really like everything. You should not blindly follow the solid principle. If sometimes you have to break something, you have to know that you break the rule, and it's fine. But the problem that I see the most is that you don't know that there are some rules if, to have something scalable and maintainable. Um, but so you just break the rule and you don't know, and then later on you don't know why it was broken.
Nico, if you could pick like 2 or 3 most important parts of the clean architecture that you would like to introduce to the team, what would you pick?
I think that the first one is talking about hexagonal architecture is part of the clean architecture. So it's really like use interface to call the outside, to not try to leak the JSON error or DB error or something like that, or super specific. Like in Mongo we have object ID. Don't try to bring that into your domain. So really do an adapter, a port and an adapter, even if sometimes I try to avoid to have only one interface with one adapter, because some people say that it makes no sense. But sometimes also it's easier to say, okay, I'm talking with an interface here. I'm not talking with the MongoDB repository or something like that. So I will try to be as agnostic as possible. So I think that this is a key point for the rest for me. If you are doing that, you are doing great. So I think the very first step is this. Then I will try to say, okay, now that you have this, let's try to add your logic when you want it to be. So not in your controller, like you catching error and then you catching, for example, the DB error and then you throw a 404 or something like that. Really, or just add a if in your controller because it's easier than your actual code that you're in the logic. So try to stick to the plan, put your logic into the right place. What I call the right place, it's in clean architecture. You start with use case, and then you can delegate to services. Um, I would say try not to hack your controller and think like my use case or my function that is called by my controller can also be called by a CLI or RabbitMQ or something like that. Like only to make a rule that says you don't receive a request and a response from your framework. So think about that your use case can be called by other inputs. So that will be my second advice, if I can give advice. And the third one, it's also try to, but this is less about clean architecture. Maybe it's more about DDD, but try to put domain logic in your domain. And here, for example, it's more about entities, for example, and try to avoid having anemic model that just doing nothing. And you have to make sure that when you, in our case, for example, when you change a status on a something, you cannot just do a user.status equal something and say, oh no, but you have to trust me, I already checked that I can change your status in that thing. No, don't say I you have to trust me. It's also, otherwise other people will change also the status. Maybe one day when you change the status, you also have to change the last change time, for example. Then you will have to dig into your code and see, okay, where do I change the state? Or it's in 50 different places. So that would be also encapsulation. It's very important.
Yeah, so you have given us 3 good advices how to start. Did you manage to introduce them to the startup company and in this startup way of working? If you did, what would be advice to how to do it?
So yeah, in my previous company, what we did is in not in this order. So we first try to introduce service, not domain application service, really just service where you have a class with different methods in it, and the purpose was to make them unit testable, and it would be okay to mock the DB and so on. That's fine. But the thing is that we use Neo4j, which is a graph database where you can basically do everything in your query: if, else, switch, etc. So we end up with 500 line of code of a query. It was in pure Neo4j query, so it was impossible to unit test, of course. And one of my first requests was to, can you please write it in Node, maybe, and test it, and maybe at the end you would just insert a user, and the check will be done in Node, so at least you can test it. So that was the very first thing. Do service, and then service can call other service with dependency injection, and then you end up with something like, oh, but now my service A needs service B, and service B needs service A. So we have cyclic dependencies. How do we tackle that? Okay, maybe I lied to you. Maybe a service that you call is not really a service; it's a use case, and then you take a problem, but you already know that if you are going into that direction, you will have this problem, but you let it fail. But that's fine, because you have already the option of, okay, guys, this is the way we are doing it for real. But at least you know why now.
A question which I have out of curiosity, because I was seeing different implementations of clean architecture in Node.js specifically, and one of the interesting things which I see about implementing this is, how do you physically, like in code, how do you implement the use cases, right? So typically you would say that, if you have an entity, okay, that might be a class, right? That's pure classics. If that's a controller, okay, you're a Symfony guy. I'm also having PHP background as well as Arthur. Class with action methods, old school, totally. Domain services, yeah, classics. You create a class and that's a service. But use case sounds like a class with a single method called execute. Or how do you do it, right? How do you structure this? That might be useful for people, because I find the use case part of the clean architecture the most confusing one. And the way how to structure this in the code is also confusing. So what's your tip on that?
That's a good question. So what we have to know also is that a use case is an application service. So it's another name to say application service if you are doing DDD. The thing is that there are, I saw 2 ways of doing it. First, you have indeed a class name get user or login or something like that. You can say, or why it's weird that my class name has a verb at the very beginning. It doesn't sound great with an execute function. So of course the constructor will receive the dependencies and the execute will receive the query, the inputs. So that's one way of doing it. That's more or less object oriented way. But the other way that I found is also, when I say, it's not me that invented it, I just saw it on Google. It's just a queuing function, like, so it's more a functional way of doing it. First, you have a function that receives the dependency that returns another function. that can be executed with the input. So it's more or less the same thing. What we did in our previous company is this functional way, even if everything else was object-oriented way. In our company now, we are saying, okay, for junior, maybe it's too complicated. Really, quotes. It's easier for them if everything is a service with a constructor. They don't have to say, oh, yes, it's a use case. It's a different way of injecting dependency. Now we just said, okay, guys, a use case is a class with constructor and an execute function, and that's it.
Yeah, I like the idea with the function and the currying function, where you kind of embody everything, and then use cases are a single execution with some parameters which are relevant in that particular moment. Yeah, that feels very natural, but I guess it comes from the fact that we understand functional programming. And you're right. As we all know, coding is really a people's problem. Software is people's problem. And it really doesn't make sense to introduce a concept in a project if you're the only guy understanding this or like grasping that, because otherwise everyone will struggle and people will hate this, and that's going to actually hurt the software, right? So sometimes those trade-offs, they are there. And the way I saw it in the past was also similar. There were functions this wasn't implemented using like currying and functional programming concepts, but there was that src/use cases directory, and then you had those bundles of functions really specified in it. That was a very small service, so it had only a handful of use cases. But I don't imagine this approach working in an enterprise scale application where you have myriads of those use cases.
I have probably the last question, but it has to be asked. In the programmers community, there's quite a bunch of people who think and believe, and they express it pretty loudly, that whole concept of the clean architecture, domain-driven development it's all about buzzwords which were created to sell the books. What do you think about it?
Maybe indeed it's a buzzword, and indeed you can see a lot of these in resume or job description. And for me, it's like patterns. They are also buzzwords. It is, but we just have to put a name on something. It's not that DDD clean architecture is the way to go always. It's not silver bullet. Like event-driven design, some people are saying that it's the best. Some people are saying that maybe it's too complicated. But maybe it's a buzzword. But at the end, what I saw also is that your code at the end is more maintainable. So you can call it whatever you want. It's DDD. It's wrong domain driven or whatever. It would be fine if maybe in 10 years. And also these principles are not new. So that's also interesting. It's not something that was born 3 years ago. It's something that was there like 20 years ago, or even TDD. I think it started like just when I was born. So it's I'm almost 40 now. So it's older than me almost. And I think that some principle might stay. Yeah, I know that, for example, TDD was really challenged by DHH. It's the guy that invented Ruby on Rails. It's also one of the founder of Basecamp. And they had a nice discussion with, I don't remember who, but I think it was Martin Fowler and Ken Beck, maybe. They had so if you want to find, it's on YouTube. There are a lot of discussion. Like I think it's 6 times 30 minutes of discussion about do we have to reboot TDD. It's super interesting to see that the new way, it's like we don't need TDD, and the old way is that okay, but bring us another solution and it will be fine. And we can drop DDD if you see something better. And maybe also DDD doesn't work for everything, that's for sure. But it's buzzwords maybe, but they are also making sense. And I don't think that we can, if we want to have something that scale, we need this principle.
Yeah, the conclusion which was expressed here, I believe it's really important here, that it doesn't matter in the end how do we call things. It helps to talk about them with others, but in the end, it's all about having good and maintainable and testable code. Yeah, and it doesn't matter how we will call it in the end.
Maybe the conclusion is also that there will be always a part of people that will believe in the conspiracy theory that it's worthless.
Yeah, maybe someday we will all wake up in some DDD heaven and they will tell us that we've been framed or something. We don't know. Yeah. But yeah, I think this is the time to wrap up. We've had really interesting discussion with you, Nicola. I appreciate your time here with us, with the Artistry of Code team. Before we will end up, we want to leave our listeners with some takeaways here. You've already thought a bunch of good thoughts which you can leave us with. But if I would like to ask you just one last time to give our listeners 3 quick tips or thoughts to live with.
Wow. Do what you like. That would be one advice, even if it's not related to really technical things, because it's important. Also, it's not technical again, but follow your heart. And also do experiments. Like, I discovered clean architecture, and I can tell you that my first version of clean architecture was a mess. I thought that I would that I understood everything. Like, I will do a presenter DTO like this, boom boom, and it didn't work at all. So if you want to learn, there are books, but the best way to learn is to try to take time to do it in the code. Put yourself like really boundaries. Like, for example, with myself, what I did is I want to have a clean architecture in the front end, and I would like to have the same code in the backend that does exactly the same, but thanks to hexagonal architecture and thanks to presenter, view model, etc. So that's a lot of things in clean architecture. It will work in my front end and in my backend. And at that time, I was like, I have view models that are shared with the backend. For example, I had a button clicked, and I was like, no, that's not possible that it happened in the backend. So it shouldn't be like that. I feel it. So I will start again and do something better. And at the end, you start to see with all your issues, then try to you see the path at the end. And that's the thing that I want to bring to people is it's that's why sometimes it's hard to sell. This is the path, but I have to explain you all the problem I had to how I discovered this path. So exercise. That would be my last advice.
Cool, that's cool. If you already mentioned some books and how important they are, or how important it's to listen to some smart people and not just focus on our skills. So if you could try to recommend some people maybe to follow on Twitter or some other platforms or some books.
Yeah, so on Twitter, I'm following a lot of people, but I think that now I'm more in the DDD world and trying to really understand everything about it. So there is Matthias Veras and Matthias Novak. I can maybe we can put that in the description. For books, there are many books. I think that the Blue Book of DDD is a good one. For clean architecture, the book of Uncle Bob didn't bring me a lot of answers. I should say. So yeah, the famous book, like if you Google what book should I read as a developer, I think that the top 20 is almost every time the same, more or less. So I would recommend to read them, and really Twitter is I think the best way to, if you are curious and following people, and at one time you will find someone that will bring a lot of added value for you. And I think that Twitter is really a good one, and some videos on YouTube, like the DDD conference and so on. On clean architecture, I didn't find a thing that changed my life. So it was really try and fail, unfortunately.
So, Nico, where can our listeners find you in order to get in touch if they would like to?
So I'm on Twitter. My Twitter nickname is Nico De Boose. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm if you see that I'm a COBOL expert on LinkedIn, that's normal. It's to trap the people that are contacting me. I already have a job asked to be a COBOL expert in bank, and just to see how or well they read my LinkedIn account. That's funny. So on LinkedIn or on Twitter. I have a blog, but I it's only in French, and it's not updated at all. So yeah,
we will link it into the description anyway. Perhaps that's going to give you some additional inspiration to throw a refreshment there. But we all know how it's with kids and work and life. It's not always easy to find the time for it. As a matter of fact, it's nearly 7 p.m. When we are finishing our recording for today. Nico, thank you very much. It was really a pleasure to have you on the show. You are our first guest, and that's really epic because you're helping us in starting a new journey with that podcast. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you again on the show. And I'm really sure that our listeners do so as well.
Thank you very much, really.
Once again, thank you very much for staying with us, for being here with us, for our listeners, and for sharing your knowledge, because that's going to be definitely an inspiration for all of us and for our listeners. And guys, as always, it's time to say bye. So stay safe and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. That's all for today. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Visit our page on Facebook and Twitter, leave us a comment under the episode, subscribe to the updates, and share it with others.
We would like to hear your feedback so that we can prepare more interesting content for you to enjoy. Hear you next time!